Good morning. Please can I welcome everyone to this meeting of the Cabinet Housing Committee on Monday, the 10th of July from the Walton Suite, Winchester Guildhall. The time is 10 o'clock. My name is Councillor Chris Westwood, Chairperson of the Committee and Cabinet Member for Housing. The meeting is live streamed from the Council's YouTube channel, and the recording will also be available after the meeting. Subtitles will be switched on, and advice on how to turn these on is set out on our website. Can everyone ensure mobile phones are on silent, and can I remind members to use the microphones? In the unlikely event that it is necessary to evacuate the building, the fire alarm will sound, and please follow the instructions given to you by our team. Can I welcome members of the public to the meeting, and I will invite you forward to speak in time for you to make your contribution. I'd like to welcome my fellow Cabinet members, Councillor Cutler on my right and Councillor Becker on my left, and committee members today, Councillor Batho, Councillor Horrell and Councillor Miller. I'd also like to welcome members of our TACT team, Mr. Chafe and Mr. Light, I believe, will be joining us, but is not here yet. We also have officers in the room who will assist us. Simon Hendy, who's our Strategic Director for Housing, on the right-hand side here. Mrs. Evans, Mrs. Knight, over here, Mr. Palmer, Mrs. Keys, Mr. Maggs, and Mrs. Russell sitting at the back. So a full team. Turning to agenda, firstly, Nancy, do we have any apologies?
Yes, thank you, Chair. We have apologies from Councillor Scott.
Thank you. Disclosures of interest. Are there any disclosures of interest? So there's no disclosures of interest. Thank you. I don't believe we have any councillors requesting to speak. Public participation. We have one person requesting to speak on two items. That's Mr. Tate, and Mr. Tate would like to speak at the when those items appear on the agenda. Turn to item 5, minutes for the previous meeting. Has everyone had time to read these, and are they, in your view, correct? I take silence to mean it's agreed. So are these minutes agreed? Agreed. Thank you. Item 6, Chair's announcements. I have one announcement to make. At the previous Cabinet Housing meeting in March, Councillor Ferguson announced the Council had received a new government grant from the Local Authority Housing Fund of over £2.7 million to assist with proposals to help refugees within the district at risk of homelessness. It was proposed that an additional 16 new homes be created by buying back former HMOs, houses of multiple occupation, and reinstating them as family homes. I'm pleased to say that we have complied with the funding requirements of the first tranche of grant and have contracted to purchase 16 HMOs. And this enables us to claim a second year funding as we're in contract to acquire these 16 properties. So in addition, we've been offered a revised memorandum of understanding by DLUC to fund an additional 22 homes, which would count towards the 1,017 home target that we have over the 10-year period. And we will report in September to Cabinet to seek authority to enter into the MOU, as at present 7 of these 22 are unfunded. The funding for those 7 can be allocated from current year's unallocated capital allocation. We will need to be in contract by the end of November on the outstanding units to comply with the funding terms. Can I thank the officers for their continuing diligence in seeking funding for new homes that are desperately needed in our district. Thank you, all of you. Moving on to item 7, the New Homes Programme. This is a standing item on our agenda, and I'm pleased that Mr. Palmer will take us through the detail of progress in delivering our new homes. The delivery of these new homes is vital to our district and our residents, and I am absolutely delighted that we've got real focus on this and are making good progress. Before we go into Mr. Palmer's presentation, I believe Mr. Tate, you would like to speak on this item. So I believe you have 3 minutes and start when you want to.
Thank you, Chair, for the opportunity to address the Cabinet Housing Committee, and welcome to you. So great to see you here. Last October, I addressed the committee and asked about the New Homes programme. I again argued that the council should be looking for a site capable of delivering far greater numbers of homes if the council are to have a realistic chance of delivering the much needed 1,000+ new homes. There are rumours circulating in parts of Winchester, particularly in the Winchester village, that there could be a development of council homes of a magnitude of 300 to 400 homes on the Pitt Vale site. Although there are fears that the scheme of this size could adversely affect the lives of existing residents, there would be huge merit in finding a large site. Can Cabinet confirm that talks are taking place about this site with the landowner? Thank you. It will perhaps come on in Mr. Palmer's report, but also the issue of phosphates, which is affecting all development. But how is the phosphate issue affecting the council's programme? And does the council or Mr. Palmer have any ideas as to how to resolve that? Slightly going off at a tangent, I was a member of the planning committee that determined the North Whiteley urban extension of 3,500 homes. I actually voted against that scheme because I argued that of the 25% affordable housing, it should all have been delivered on site rather than just 15%. And with purchases of properties through developers coming forward, I just wonder whether officers have reconsidered the position of North Whiteley and whether there is an opportunity to secure greater parcels of land to deliver more affordable housing. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Tate. Item 1 of your 3 there, around development of Winchester Village and Pitt Vale. To my knowledge, there is nothing in the emerging local plan that says that we will be developing in that area. So, and unless any of my colleagues and officers around the table have information to the contrary, I don't see that there is any proposed development at present in that site. Okay, the second item, phosphates. You'll be pleased to know that that we are developing a proposal for the improvements to our own sewage works that Winchester Council has owned for a very long time. And it is our aim and intention that the work on those sewage works to mitigate the phosphates issue will provide the credits that we require to allow our new homes building to continue into the future. That paper will be brought through committee and to Cabinet in the autumn. Item 3, I was not clearly around at the time the planning permission was giving at Whiteley, and that has obviously been pursued over a period of time. So maybe I could ask Mr. Palmer just to comment on that.
Yeah, North Whiteley is very interesting in that it did have a much lower affordable housing requirement initially because of the very high infrastructure costs. But what we're seeing now at Whiteley is more and more affordable housing being delivered via developers coming straight to both RPs and the council, offering whole phases of development. So we've got some off-site contributions, some capital given to us by developers. In effect, we're using that capital to buy the affordable housing that some might argue should have been there in the first place. So by a roundabout way, I'm sure that that development ultimately will meet the 40% affordable housing. It's just probably delivered in a way we never imagined it would be 10 years ago when the Section 106 was actually negotiated.
Thank you, Mr. Palmer, and thank you, Mr. Tate. So moving on, Mr. Palmer, could you give us some detail on our New Homes programme and progress? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Presentation is on the screen now, just to help members guide them through what I'm going to talk about. So the first slide here is the very latest scheme that's been approved via planning. It's for five affordable rented homes at Woodman Close at Sparsholt, 3 one-bedroom houses and 2 two-bedroom bungalows, all designed to AECB standard, all with very, very low running costs. We're just going through the procurement process at the moment, talking to our advisors about costs and the best approach in terms of the build tender, what type of contract to use, which will give us the best value, and looking at alternative costs. So if we designed it to building regulations only, or whether we designed it to the full ACB standards, is there any difference in the cost? What can we afford to build? So that's the stage we're at the moment with Woodman Close. Obviously happy to answer any questions at the end of the presentation on that. So moving on, the current schemes that are on site. The first one is at Cobbett Gardens at Whiteley. So we're taking a phased handover of the properties there. So since December, we've taken over handover of 38 new homes. The remainder are due for completion next month. They've proved to be very popular, so we've had lots of interest on the waiting list. We've taken reservations for all of the shared ownership properties down there, or people have expressed interest in it, which is heartening to see in this current climate, where last January we were quite nervous whether the shared ownership market would hold up because of interest rate rises and the bad news that you hear almost daily. So we are heartened to see that there has been a lot of interest in these properties, and they are built to a very high standard, and clearly that is attracting people to them, is the fact they are built to AECB standards with very low running costs. And that's the point of difference, I think, between what we've got for sale down there and private developers and RPs have. So the specification of our properties is much better, and I think that's proving its value to us at the moment. So moving on, the second scheme on site is Southbrook Cottages at Mithridath. Again, the build progress is going well, should be completed in December. It's the council's first Passive House Plus scheme, with very high projected energy savings for residents. So that's moving forward to plan. The next scheme on site is Winnell Flats. Again, progressing along the lines of the contract timetable. Within that development, there are a group of 3 houses which will be complete very shortly. So we've made some tentative marketing of those 3 properties over the last month. And again, interest has been really high for those shared ownership properties as well, which is again, very positive news for our programme. the 2 blocks of flats which are being built, one for the proposed housing company, Venta Living, 41 flats there and 32 shared ownership flats. Again, they're all on time to be completed in November. So again, some very positive news there. And hopefully when we begin to market those properties, there'll be the similar levels of high interest. So moving on, I think, if we go back one, there was another picture of Winnell, just showing the layout of the 1-bedroom flats, because they are about 40 square meters, so they are quite compact, I think you would say. But the reason we put the slide up, just to give members a chance to look at the layout, to show that there is a, obviously bathroom, kitchen, living room and bedroom. So they are, they have been designed for a very particular part of the marketplace for younger single people. And again, we are hopeful from our initial marketing that they will prove to be very attractive. So moving on, we've got 3 schemes in planning at the moment. Dyson Drive and Corner House are both affected by phosphates, and so when we're in a position to have a phosphate solution, it should allow those schemes to be granted consent, even though the works to the sewage treatment works, as was already mentioned just a minute ago, they won't have to be completed in order for us to get a planning consent. So I think getting the planning consent is wholly reliant on us demonstrating to the Environment Agency and Natural England that we have a solution. That solution doesn't necessarily need to be in place, that just needs to be in place by the time we occupy those properties. So at least it allows them to move through a planning process. With regards to Witherbed Lane, we're trying to address a biodiversity net gain question there, because it is built on a piece of scrub land which has been gradually covered in self-seeded trees. So we need to carry out mitigation work on another site close by before we're able to progress that through planning. So just looking at the schemes under consideration at the moment, we've got an exception scheme at Mitradeva, Waterloo Cottages, which has or is going through a pre-app process at the moment, and then on to a public consultation. So again, that's quite positive. The reaction from planning has been positive so far. We've got a couple of garage areas at Stanmore that we're looking at, and I know one of those has been subject to some antisocial behaviour complaints, which is one of the reasons why we're looking at developing it. But again, potentially there's another 20 homes on those 2 sites. Winecross Cottages at Borrant. Again, we've been through the pre-app process now, and we think we've got something that concords with our planning policies for that area, so that will progress. We've reinstigated negotiations with South Downs National Park on Dykes Farm, and we had a positive meeting with them on site 4 to 6 weeks ago. So we're just waiting some comments back from their planning committee. We can't say how many homes at this stage could potentially be accommodated. It much depends on what they feel the landscape characteristics are of that particular site. But I hope that it will be a substantial number, certainly over 50 on that site. But it's not in our planning area, even though it's only a mile from the city centre of Winchester. It's in South Downs. So there's also a couple of schemes at Alresford. We're progressing with negotiations. One is a site owned by a private developer. We're having negotiations about the price, because at the moment achieving viability on our schemes is particularly challenging with high interest rates. So we're just renegotiating the price. And then we have 2 extra care schemes on Section 106 sites, where the site will be given to us for a nominal sum. Both of those are in negotiation with the respective developers. I don't know if there's any update on King's Barton, but the last conversations we're having with Carla is about having a suitable site. So the site that they've offered us is too small to accommodate the Section 106 requirements, which was for 60 flats. So we're looking to see how we can expand the site so that we can fit the dwellings on. So in terms of progress on the programme, we've completed 153, 104 on site, 300 in feasibility. So we're over halfway towards our 1,000 home target 2.5 years into the programme. So again, I think it's safe to say that I feel we're on track with that. So any questions?
Okay, are there any questions? Okay, Councillor Hurrell.
Thank you, Chair, and congratulations on your new role on Cabinet. Chair, I have a question that relates to two of the sites that are mentioned on Mr. Palmer's list this morning, but they both relate to car parking. Mr. Palmer knows that there is much distress at Southbrook Cottages, Micheldever, because we haven't managed to resolve the car parking issue that goes alongside the building of those flats. And the promise to residents was that that would be resolved. They thought before the building started. At the moment, it's going to be when the building's finished, which is not ideal. But I also fear for the Woodland Close site, which again had a very significant issue re car parking in that whole area, and we still haven't resolved that. So, Chair, I'm just seeking reassurance that we can actually get these issues resolved, because otherwise villages that are very keen to have new homes, very supportive, are being they've become disillusioned with our effectiveness to actually do this because we can't resolve the car parking issues. And I appreciate some of them may be linked to other authorities, not all in our own control. And Mr. Palmer knows that I'm concerned about both of these, been advocating for both sites in my village, in my ward. But it would be helpful to understand where our priorities sit here, because it is, as I say, giving us, the council, a bad reputation because we haven't been able to resolve some of these things. Thank you.
Mr. Palmer, could you comment on and reassure Councillor Hurrell on the parking issues, please?
Yes, I mean, I'm fully aware, having been involved in the Micheldever scheme for a number of years, that, you know, the main stumbling block was always going to be car parking at Southbrook Cottages, because it is quite a small rural close. And one of the reasons why the development took quite a long time to get on site is that we wanted to ensure that we gave confidence to the community that we were going to provide additional car parking. So we got planning consent for that car parking, and the idea was we did it. And a lot of the timetables obviously linked to what the builder does and the build timetable. However, we started work, the contractor started work, and came across a problem with the Section 278 agreement with the County Council and the Highway Department, and then the various audits that they do, safety audits, which has meant that we haven't been able to progress the car parking as we would like. It will be completed and it will be done, but unfortunately it's caused a bit of a hiatus because it's not been able to be delivered when we hoped it would be, but it will be delivered. But I appreciate that building works are disruptive to local communities, and we try and do as much as we can to minimise that disruption. But unfortunately, in this instance, we've been caught up in a bit of a tangle in terms of the legal agreements with the Highway Authority. So again, I suppose to answer Councillor Hurrell is that we do our utmost to prevent local disruption, but sometimes circumstances do conspire against us.
Thank you, Mr. Palmer. Councillor Batho.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Palmer, for the presentation. I just wanted to pick up on the development at Mitchell Lever, because I know from previous presentations this has been part of the council's novel and innovative approach to the carbon crisis by developing some of the first passive house developments in the country. I just wondered if you could give us some feedback on the work that's progressed and any positive developments that you can identify from that work that we've undertaken. Thank you.
Yes, the Passive House Plus scheme at Mitchell Lever is a highly innovative scheme, and I think one of the first undertaken by a council in terms of local authority council housing, and it was pushing the boundaries back in terms of the design. And as I say, it is a pilot project. We are hoping that the evaluation will prove that the investment was worthwhile for the extra insulation and heat and carbon savings that will hopefully be delivered. The contractor was new to it as well, and the contractor has been using that project to demonstrate to other councils that have come to visit what can be achieved. So it was very much, a first for that company, and a first for this council was probably, and a lot of other councils as well have been to see that. So it's generating a lot of interest. The proof will be when people move in, and we have got advanced monitoring equipment going into the property, so we will be able to analyse remotely how much energy is being used and compare that to, say, a house or a flat built to normal building regulation standards. So the monitorings will start immediately people move in. So I think some of those answers won't be available for another 18 months, 2 years. From a building perspective, the builders seem to be don't seem to have had any fundamental problems. As I say, it's been new to them as well, but I've not had any feedback that they were struggling with any aspects of it. So I think it's so far so good, and hopefully the tenants will enjoy a very low cost home to run at the end of the day.
Thank you, Mr. Palmer, and I think it's great that we're providing such fantastic properties for our tenants. Thank you. Any further questions? Councillor Horan.
Thank you, Chair. I'm delighted to see some extra care schemes coming onto the schedule, having been very heavily involved in the first one at Chesil. But I'm just trying to understand in governance terms, where will the extra care, if Kingsbarton is the first one to come through, or Whiteley, but how will they be processed? Is that information going to the forums for those MDAs? Is it coming back to here as the cabinet housing? How are we processing that agreement? Because obviously we learnt a lot from the first project. We obviously want to make sure we take all that learning to the new opportunities, obviously working in partnership with the county council and their care team. Thank you.
Thank you. And I am aware that we've learnt a lot from building extra care at Chesil, for example, and we'll be taking that learning. And Mr. Palmer, would you like to comment further on the Kingsbarton? And I believe it was subject to presentation in March. Actually, we talked about location.
Yeah, I think it's a lot of moving parts to the extra care discussions at Kingsbarton. The first one is we need a site that can accommodate 60 extra care flats and ancillary facilities. Now, we've learned from Chesil what's important to put in and what's not important. So, and as building costs increase, we've got to be very cute, shall I say, about what we put in, because we don't want to build too much, because every square metre will cost us thousands of pounds. So the design of them will be very tight, but will reflect what's the really important requirements. So the first thing is to set for the negotiations with Cala at the moment is the site's not big enough to accommodate 60 homes, small amount of car parking and the ancillary facilities. So the first thing to do is get the site and make sure it's in the right place in that particular phase of the development. We've got an architect appointed to make sure that it's properly, spatially designed at this stage. We have involved the county council, so the county council and their own adult service team are involved in the design process as well. So we're in regular correspondence and conversations with them to make sure it's right. And we're also in conversation with them about funding for the scheme. So they'll hopefully be putting some capital funding into the scheme. And then hopefully we'll also have conversations with Homes England about capital funding, although because it's a Section 106 site, that may or may not be available. So once we've had all those conversations, we then move on. It will require a planning consent. And so I understand that it will have to mitigate for nitrates and phosphates as well. So we've got that to consider. So it goes through planning. From our own governance point of view, we will bring a report to Cabinet Housing about, if you like, the final business case for approval as well. So there's quite a lot of stages to go through almost before we're at final business case stage. And the first being making sure we've got the site that we want and that's big enough.
Thank you, Mr. Palmer. Any further questions? Councillor Cutler.
Thank you, Chair. I found it very encouraging when you were talking about the demand for the housing in North Whiteley. And I got the implication that it was because there were the higher energy standards that stoked the demand for them compared with other housing in Whiteley. With the Winnall flats, I suppose there are two factors that would push the demand. We had always hoped or always felt that there would be demand for one-bedroom flats anyway. To what extent do you think those, it's probably an impossible question to answer, but the energy efficiency and the right type of buildings are affecting the demand there? You know, which factors are more important to a certain extent, which I accept might be impossible to say.
Yeah, it probably is, and the proof will be obviously when they're complete and we try to let them. But I think that one thing that from the initial work that we did, the marketing, was that Winchester City Council and its subsidiaries, should I say, are reputable bodies, and people want some form of security of tenure and know that they're dealing with a good landlord. And I think we are a good landlord and we can trade on that reputation. So that's one very attractive measure. Secondly is that our rents will be equivalent to private sector rents, which will be basically a one-bedroom flat in a converted building, possibly a Victorian Edwardian building in the centre of town, which isn't going to be as energy efficient and new as our Winnall flat scheme. So I think there is those two factors together make it a very attractive proposition. And I think that, you know, put my cards on the table, I think we will have no problem letting these properties if they are marketed at market rent because of that package of being very low cost to run with a very good landlord.
Thank you, Mr. Palmer. Any final questions? I'd like to move on. Councillor Horrell, quick one, if we may.
Yes, thank you, Chair. There's such a lot going on here, lots to inquire. Dyson Drive, Chair, was on a list many years ago when I was working with Mr. Palmer, and I see it's moving forward, but obviously has been subject to the nitrates and phosphates sort of hold up. However, I know some people, some residents are concerned about the loss of open space here, which perhaps when we first envisaged this development, we hadn't had COVID and we hadn't had the issues of open space perhaps as highlighted as they now are. I just wondered whether we still are as wedded to Dyson Drive as an opportunity for additional homes, given the nature of that space, and whether you also have received lobbying from residents who are concerned about that loss of that ground. Thank you, Chair.
Yes, I mean, I think it was when we looked at Abbots Barton as a whole, we looked at sites which may be suitable, and the issue of open space with regards to Abbots Barton was, let's protect and enhance the significant parts of the open space. So we rode back from our proposals to develop on that big open green, even though it was quite a small close, while still being committed obviously to Dyson Drive, because in effect the residents of Dyson Drive can enjoy the very large park, which is probably only 50 yards behind their existing properties. So I think we've done two things. We've protected the really large and important open space, and we've enhanced that through the provision of the woodland walk on the other side of the river, which was just a piece of scrub land. So we've invested in making what's there better. In return, then the Dyson Drive has stayed on the table as a proposed scheme for new homes.
Thank you. Any further questions before I move on? No further questions, so we'll move to debate. Any debate? See no debate. So I slightly got in there slightly late, Councillor Horrell, but I'll let you go.
Thank you. Chair, I can only continue to support the new homes programme. I mean, the 1,000 home target that we've had for some considerable time and across party, I think is to be commended. And I think all of us working collectively to deliver that is really important. I'm also pleased that we continue to see development in the city, but also across the district, and some of our smaller communities are very grateful for having a handful of new homes to make them more sustainable. So I think that objective, I hope, will continue to be one that we can all support. I also welcome the government's money helping us to buy homes for Ukrainian and indeed Afghan families. I think that is testimony to the fact that we understand the housing needs in our district, and we can evidence our support of that. So I hope, Chair, that that is equally embraced by everyone. Great to have that money. And Chair, the other thing that in terms of new homes, Mr. Palmer mentioned earlier, Homes England, and I think we have worked successfully with them in the past. There is money available. We've demonstrated that we can deliver, and that what we have produced is a very positive contribution. And I hope we can continue to knock at their door for some of our other schemes to help us deliver more homes more quickly in the district. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Horrell. Any further debate? Okay, so to sum up, Mr. Palmer, thank you for a very comprehensive presentation there on progress. I concur with everything that Councillor Horrell has said. I think it is a significant piece of work that we're doing, benefit the residents, and pursuing the target of over 1,000 homes in a 10-year period is absolutely the right thing to do. I commend the team, you and the team, for the progress that you're making. To have sight of 580 new homes in the first 2.5 years of the programme, I think is excellent progress. I also commend you on the diligence in which you are pursuing government grants, whether that be Homes England or the local Authority Housing Fund or any other source of funding that we can achieve, which is massively welcome to the funding that we need to drive these homes forward. So thank you. Thank you again. Okay, moving on. Back to the agenda. Here we go. Moving on to item 8. So item 8 is establishing a local housing company. This item has exempt appendices in the paper. So before I move forwards, can I just get an indication from the councillors around the table if they were wanting to discuss in detail the content of the exempt appendices? So Councillor Miller, you would like to discuss the content of the exempt appendices. Pardon?
I think it's better to do it there than elsewhere.
No, that's fine. That's fine. I'm happy to do that. It just makes a difference in the way that we run the proceedings. So the way I would like to move forwards with this item is to discuss the bulk of the paper, excluding the content of the exempt appendices. We move forwards with that now. Once we have concluded the discussion on that element of the paper, we'll move into closed session to discuss the exempt content of the exempt appendices. And then we'll move back into open session for the recommendations. So to start with this, I know Mr. Tate would also like to speak, and I'll invite you to the table shortly, Mr. Tate. That's okay. First of all, I'd like to thank the officers for preparing this paper and preparing the business case for the establishment of a local housing company. Providing homes for all is a key priority within the council plan, which includes supporting households who struggle to access affordable, longer-term market housing. To support this priority, the council has established a wholly owned local housing company, Venta Living Limited. This report brings forward the final business plan for consideration required under the shareholder agreement with Venta Living Limited, with an illustrative business model based on leasing 41 new flats in Winnell. The business case allows for future leasing opportunities to be considered on a case-by-case basis and fulfills the council's commitment to the community to ensure a greater diversity of tenure on the Winnell estate. Approval of the proposed financial business plan and reserve matters will allow Venta Living to commence trading subject to agreement by full council. Before we move into the detail, Mr. Tate, I believe you want to speak on this item. Would you like to come forwards and speak? That'd be great. Thank you. You have the usual 3 minutes. You use the procedure and start as when you want to.
Thank you, Chair, for the opportunity to speak again. I've taken a particular interest in the issue of a housing company and think that this initiative has been far too long in coming forward, as it was originally discussed back in 2014, subsequently 2017, and many times since then. So I have to wonder whether it's really worth all the effort. The council currently owns property which it already lets to other affordable housing providers. So why is this option the right one? Chair, I'm going to slightly compromise you here, because you will be becoming a director of the Winchester Housing Trust, which was approached about the Winnell flats, but also Rent Plus, who have the initiative as a rent to buy. And in the paper, the final part 14, paragraph 14 or section 14, options C and D both touch upon those. So my question is, why is the council considered better at delivering this form of housing vehicle to provide the intermediate housing, affordable housing, not specifically through Hampshire Home Choice? I also wonder, I wholeheartedly, as an individual, support the council's purchase of the 16 properties. But my concern with that was it was using housing revenue money, essentially the council tenants' rent, to buy properties which subsequently will be made available to people on Hampshire Home Choice. But at the moment, those properties are going to be occupied by people not immediately in the Hampshire Home Choice system. And so couldn't the housing company have been the appropriate vehicle to have bought those properties, as opposed to doing it through the housing revenue account? So whilst I think the idea seems good, I've struggled with the financial modelling. I'm no expert here, but I have given it a go to fully understand why the option of a housing company is better than just doing things through the HRA or outsourcing it to the likes of Winchester Housing Trust or Vivid, who've got Black Swan Buildings, or Bournemouth Churches Housing Company, who had properties in Sussex Street. So I've read the paper reasonably carefully, and I'm still quite perplexed by it. But thank you for the opportunity to speak. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tate. So I've got two questions there. One is why the benefit of using the housing company, and the second is the purchase of the HMOs using some of the HRA account, and the benefits to the residents of that happening. Mr. Hendy, may I turn to you to answer those 2 points, please?
Thank you, Chair. My understanding of the strategic business case for this development was that it was seeking to introduce a new tenure onto the Whittle estate, so private rented housing that was to be supported by the community. The company was set up to provide that specifically. Some of the models that Mr. Tate has mentioned wouldn't be the models that would be used for a private rented product at market rents. Also, in relation to why is the HRA not providing this? Firstly, because of the reason I've just mentioned, but secondly, as the paper points out, this model is beneficial to the HRA in terms of the impact over the 30-year period. In relation to the local authority housing fund allocations, actually it's the other way around at the moment. We have agreement that those properties, if there is not existing demand at this point in time for Ukrainian households, they will be let to existing households in the housing register, and then we will have a commitment to provide accommodation to Ukrainian families when they come forward. This is mitigating the overall housing demand in the district, because if we weren't doing this, then those households would still come forward, they would access the existing housing that's available, and that would be at the expense of those waiting on the housing register.
Thank you, Mr. Hendy, and thank you, Mr. Tate, for your questions. So moving on, can I please ask Mrs. Knight to take us through more detail of the paper? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This paper brings forward the final financial business plan and moves us ever closer to the conclusion of a long journey, as Councillor Tate references, in our quest and endeavours to form a wholly owned housing company. Extensive background to this proposal has been well documented over the years in previous committee reports, as listed at the back of the report, and most recently in reports brought to Cabinet last December and in March this year. We hit a milestone in May this year when the housing company known as Venta Living was incorporated, which currently remains dormant pending agreements of the business plan by the shareholder. The establishment of Venta Living Limited supports the council plan priorities, as Councillor Westwood outlined. As with all new council homes, as Andrew Palmer has endorsed, are leased to Venta Living, and they will be will be energy efficient with lower carbon emissions to support the climate change. work. It also provides homes for all, meeting local housing need through a wide range of tenures for households who, again, as Councillor Westwood referenced, struggle to access affordable, longer-term council and other affordable housing products. And this is due to the limited supply and the very high cost of private rented housing within the local market. The tenants at Venta Living Limited will benefit from a greater security of occupation and high quality management and maintenance services provided by the council as an established council landlord. It will also support working households to live and work in the district, contributing to a vibrant local economy. Survey feedback back in 21-22 from younger households through the Business and Housing Policy Next Generation Task and Targeting Group also stressed the need for better renting options. And as explained in this report, the shareholder agreement with Venta Living Limited and the business model is based on leasing 41 brand new one-bedroom flats under development at Winnell, which you've just been shown the progress on that. In response to external legal advice, the new leasing model, which is different from that previously presented in CAB 3366 in December, is based on the company managing the properties and the lettings and the council retaining responsibility for the building, its maintenance, fixtures and fittings. Venta Living Limited will let the properties and collect the rent, deduct from this a percentage of the net income receivable to cover its cost, management and overheads, passing the net receivable after these deductions to the council as a lease payment. And the reasoning behind setting the deductible amount as a percentage of the gross rent receivable is that it will provide more certainty to Venta Living Limited about the amount it receives to fund its operation each year. This allows the company's costs to increase with rental growth, but provides comfort to the council that these costs are controlled. The HRA will be financially better off in the longer term than if it had managed the development as affordable housing. This is illustrated in Appendix E, which shows that HRA is estimated to be 3.5 million better off through this arrangement at the end of the 30-year leasing period. In addition, the General Fund makes a 5% margin on any support services it provides directly to Venta Living Limited. Although as illustrated at Appendix D, this only amounts to 25,000 over the 30-year lease period. Venta Living Limited receives a proportion of the net income towards its cost, and these are based on, we believe, reasonable assumptions within the strategic business plan, and so it is likely that material losses will occur under the unlikely that material losses will occur under the new leasing model. And so in conclusion, the strategic business case for the incorporation of a wholly owned subsidiary housing company was detailed and set out in the Cabinet paper in December last year and is summarised in this report at section 12.3. Members are reminded that the company is not intended, and nor is it financially viable, to be an investment or a development vehicle that will deliver significant returns. However, it will extend the council's existing housing offer to support its Homes for All priority, whilst allowing the council as the sole shareholder to retain a high degree of control. So approval of the proposed financial business plan and reserve matters will allow Venta Living Limited to start trading, subject to agreement by full council. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mrs. Knight. Moving forwards, let me just remind the committee what we're here to make a decision upon. So the recommendations to this committee are to approve the draft financial business plan as Appendix B, the exempt part of the agenda, refer to full council for consideration. Second recommendation is subject to the approval of the finance business plan by full council to authorise the strategic director with housing responsibility to finalise the lease on one block of 41 one bedroom flats in Winnell from the council to Venta Living Limited. And secondly, to approve general fund capital expenditure of £150,000 for the equity investment in Venta Living Limited by the council, which is a sufficient level of funding for working capital purposes. Third recommendation, to authorise soft marketing of the units at Winnell by Venta Living, so that tenancies commence with a minimum delay following the completion, subject to full council agreeing the reserved matters. And fourthly, to refer approval of appointment of Fianda Toval Limited as external auditors to the full council. So those are the recommendations that we're seeking to approve today at this meeting. I'll take questions through the report. What I'd like to do is just rather than randomly go through it, we'll go through it section by section. And if you can let me know if you have any questions there, I'm sure the officer would be delighted to answer them. So section 1, council plan outcome. Are there any questions in section 1? Section 2, financial implications. Any questions? Councillor Miller.
Morning, and thank you, Chair. My concerns on this paper effectively are about 2.2, 2.3 and 2.7, that the management charge is going to be set at 18%, particularly with the council still being responsible for building maintenance and fixtures and fittings. As Mr. Palmer pointed out, that these are going to be very desirable properties, and therefore shouldn't have that high a turnover of tenants. So therefore, there shouldn't be that much disproportionate amount of time spent reletting them. 18% is an incredibly high percent. The public sector, the management fees are about 8%. So are we in fact creating a model that gives us the money to run the company, regardless of what the real cost of doing it should be? That's my first question.
Do you want to give us how many questions do you have there?
About 4.
Okay. You give us the 4 questions and then we'll answer them.
Yeah, I'm looking at 2.6. Having accounts produced in 2 formats, I've been an accountant, is a nightmare for the internal team and the auditors. They're going to have to create one format and then convert them, and therefore there'll be extra work for the auditors to make sure that you've complied with the new regulations that you've produced those accounts under. I mean, to me, it's just, again, an added expense of running this scheme like this. 2.19 effectively agrees that if we had to do another block, we're going to have a whole new agreement and a whole lot more paperwork. So this model is only successful for one. My other point would be that are the directors actually aware and later on of all their responsibilities for being a director of this company, because I wouldn't want to be one. Lastly, we've created effectively a property company, not a housing company. We're not actually providing the extra houses than the council have built. We're just having a company to run them. So those would be my points or questions.
Thank you. Mrs. Knight, Mr. Hendy. Mr. Hendy.
Thank you, Chair. Shall I come back on those? First, the question in terms of turnover not being high, if that's the case, then fantastic, because of course the cost of maintenance fall to the HRA at the moment, so that will benefit the HRA. In relation to whether the 18% fee is too high, we've actually taken independent external advice on this. The market average is 20%, so this is below that. In terms of the accounts, I'm not qualified to answer that, but perhaps Liz could step in there. And lastly, the shareholders agreement makes it clear that if the company wants to propose a different business plan with a different model or a different offer to the council, it does that on an annual basis. And clearly any costs involved in developing that model, they would bring forward to the council for it to consider. This is quite specific about this model and this proposal at this point in time.
Thank you. Mrs. Keys, do you want to comment on the accounting issue?
Certainly, yes, thank you, Chair. The property company as a public company is required to produce its accounts under UK GAAP, generally accepted accounting policies, and the council is required to present its accounts on international financial reporting standards. There is very little logic between those two, but it is just a requirement of being a subsidiary company of the council that we will be required to present group accounts with the company's figures within ours. So we will require them to present on an international financial reporting standards basis as well.
Thank you. Any further questions on section 2? Councillor Becker.
Thank you. It's actually picking up on a point that Councillor Miller's already raised. When we originally considered the housing company, we were talking about its ability to pick up further future projects. But this paper and this model seems very focused on the Winnell block of flats, because that is the one that has been built and that is the one that is about to be leased. but I just wanted some assurance about the way in which the company has sufficient flexibility to pick up future properties.
Mr. Andy.
Thank you, Chair. As mentioned previously, the shareholders agreement with the company allows the company to bring forward business plans on an annual basis for this project and any other projects if we wanted to. So if we wanted to identify other opportunities working with the council on assets that the council owns, it could look at models such as this or alternative models. It could also look at opportunities in the marketplace. That will be up for the directors to decide how they want to develop the business of the company, and ultimately it's the council that has the say over whether they want to support any of those business plans it brings forward on an annual basis. So there's quite some considerable control the council has over the work of the company into the future.
Thank you. Councillor Cutler.
Yeah, I mean, I have a very specific question of Mrs. Keys, really, so that I can understand the VAT situation. The exemption provides for recovering VAT from repair works, from what I understand, and we have a limit. That's 5% of what? And how much in danger, how much of a problem would it be if we reached that limit?
I haven't got the detail on what the 5% is of precisely, but I can certainly come back to committee with that information. But it does cause, or the partial exemption is an exemption for all of the council services. So it's about being able to reclaim VAT on non-business transactions, which we have as being a local authority. So it's a specific exemption for local authorities. But it is relevant to all of our services, and we use some of that partial exemption in various places across the council. So if we were to breach it by having to claim a large amount of VAT back specifically around this project or other projects, it would cause a problem across the council. We would lose that exemption and we wouldn't be able to claim back any of that VAT. So it would have a significant financial impact to the council if we were to breach partial exemption threshold.
Just for clarity, though, it's a matter of monitoring, is it, and not claiming back above the 5%. So if we get near the 5%, you just don't claim it. Is that the case, or do we automatically breach it if we've suddenly got a lot of things that we're spending money on?
Yeah, it's calculated over a 5-year rolling average. So we have to look at the amount of VAT that we're claiming on those particular activities over 5 years. So we do monitor it, but we don't monitor it, every time we make a payment. So we would have to keep a very close eye on how close to the threshold we were.
Thank you, Mrs. Keys. I believe this was a risk that was identified and is in the risk section of this report as well. Thank you. Any further questions on section 2, or maybe we move on? Moving on, section 3, legal and procurement implications. Section 4, workforce implications. Councillor Horan.
Chair, I think Councillor Miller raised this about liability for the directors, but I'm not sure we heard a direct answer to that, to ensure that we understand what is the corporate liability for those who have offered themselves to be directors for this company. Thank you.
Standing.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So within the business plan, provision's been made to provide indemnity insurance for the directors of the company. Once they become directors of the company, they're bound by Companies Act and their responsibilities to the company. Clearly, that covers everything up to acting negligently. So that's the level of liability the directors have. As you can see from the model that's been developed now, it's a much more simplified model of how the company operates in the future, with the council offering to provide services to the company, such as housing management and lettings. One of the main services the the company will be responsible for is the collection of rents, and one of the services that the council provide under the resourcing contract is the management of arrears and lettings. And as Councillor Horrell and other councillors will be familiar, the council's performance in that area is particularly good, so that should give the directors some comfort if they're reminded to enter into that resourcing contract that their liabilities in that respect will be met.
Thank you, Mr. Hendy. Moving on, section 5, property and asset implications. Section 6, consultation and communication. Section 7, environmental considerations. Section 8, public sector equality duty. Section 9, data protection, impact assessment. Section 10, risk management. Councillor Horrell.
Chair, clearly the VAT question that's already been asked and Mrs. Keys has raised, do we feel that we're giving sufficient emphasis in the risk register to that work and that monitoring and that assessment so that we don't find ourselves in other difficult positions as identified here? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, the team are monitoring that partial exemption calculation through the year anyway. And as you say, it is raised in the risk assessment. I mean, yes, we are aware of it. We've looked at what we've forecasted the repairs and maintenance costs for the company to be. We've modelled that. We've included it within the calculations, and we're satisfied that the model as it is presented today has sufficient headroom within that, so we don't breach the partial exemption. Obviously, anything else that comes forward, whether it's to do with Venture Living Limited or another project elsewhere in the council, we will also take into consideration the impact that would then have.
Chair, sorry, can I just to clarify then, there's obviously the corporate risk register managed by the senior leadership team. I'm assuming that this makes a sort of segue into that alongside other projects, because this is a sort of a cumulative effect for the council, potentially with other activities. So I'm assuming Mrs. Evans, Mr. Hendy, etc., in their role as senior directors of the council, will obviously be picking that up across the whole piece. Thank you.
Standing.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, we understand the committee's concerns about this VAT issue. If I could just draw out some point of clarification that actually is in the report. So the main issue of concern around VAT, because all the costs of repairs and maintenance fall back to the council, there clearly will be some VAT payments on a day-to-day basis in terms of repairs. But the major issues around larger scale cyclical repairs that will not take place under the council's current plan until past year 15. As set out in the report, the lease with Venture Living will give the council the ability to terminate the lease in the future if it wants to. Would mean bringing the properties back into the housing revenue account, but then of course the costs of those significant costs of those works, which would attract significant levels of VAT, would not jeopardise the council's position in relation to partial exemption. So we have got a way in which we can give you some comfort that that can be managed in the future. And on top of that, yes, clearly we can escalate this into the corporate risk register as seen so to do.
Thank you. And if it's any consolation, I also had on my list of questions the impact on the VAT position, and I'll reassure Councillor Horrell that I've had those discussions with Mr. Hendy several times, and we've given it full consideration. We're well aware that we need to monitor this, and Mrs. Keys has outlined the process for monitoring the overall VAT position. It is a serious problem. It should we breach it, I believe we're 55% of the way up the limit at the moment, roughly, and the volume of work that may go through under the housing company is a smaller percentage that we will monitor fully. So that's the conversation I've had as well. Thank you. Any further questions on on risk management. Councillor Harrell.
Chair, obviously, as this project evolves, we're learning, all of us, it's a new entity, a sort of annual review, but it does say in the risk register that there'll be regular reports of the performance. Are they coming to this committee? Are they coming for each meeting so that we just know when we're having that check-in, so that as this evolves and indeed we understand whether the project is delivering as we expected, that we can all see that? How will we see the governance of that? Thank you.
Is that Mrs. Knight or Mr. Henty?
I'd take that, Chair. Yes, under the shareholders agreement, there's the ability for the council to request information for the company. At the moment, the constitution acts on the basis of Cabcom Housing receiving that information, receiving the business plan, advising the council. So clearly, if this committee is so minded, they can make requests on the company to provide information. Also has the ability to request directors of the company to attend the meeting, minimum of 3 directors to attend and answer questions on its activity. So that opportunity does exist already.
And if I may add to that, as portfolio holder for housing, I will take a keen interest in the success of this particular venture, and we'll be also monitoring it from my position. And also, you and I meet on a regular basis. Well, hopefully they're in the diary now, and can be subject for that conversation as well. So we should get full visibility.
Thank you.
Any further questions on the risk section? Moving on, section 11, supporting information. Councillor Becker.
Thank you. At 11.7, there is a fee given of £68,200 for the council providing services to the company. How was that figure arrived at? Will that be changing as fees and charges increase, decrease over the years? Because at the moment it says it's an annual overall fee, but doesn't give much flexibility for future movement.
Mr. Keys.
Thank you, Chair. So we've calculated the amount of time that we think it will take to deliver those services to the company, and then the council has got a 5% margin that it's charging on those, so that's included within that price. So we would look to continue that into the future. So annually we would reassess the time and the price of selling those services.
Thank you. So the 68,000 isn't set every year going forward. Lovely. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions on section 11? Councillor Harrell.
Chair, it follows on from Councillor Becker's question. Obviously, the services that the council are providing to the company, are we backfilling for the time and effort that will obviously be taken to do this from other council HRA work, or how does the team intend to manage that in the short term? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Handy.
Yes, thank you, Chair. The cost of these services will be held in the general fund, not the housing revenue account. So no, we won't be backfilling our officers in the HRA for that. And as been mentioned before, overall it generates a slight margin for the general fund in the provision of those services. At the moment, the expectation is that these additional services can be contained within the existing establishment costs.
Thank you. Any final questions on section 11? We have on section 12, proposals. And section 13, conclusions. Section 14, other options considered and rejected. Any further questions? If I have a dip into the, sorry,
Chair, I welcome Mr. Tate's sort of question about alternatives, because there are other models other than doing it ourselves. And having lived with this concept for many years, as Mr. Tate indicated, it has evolved. However, have Mr. Hendy and the team, Mrs. Knight, identified alternative providers who would fit the bill if we decided not to fulfil this project ourselves within the marketplace. I know you said that there were some who were not constituted appropriately to act in the way that we wish. And I know we want to be a very ethical and good landlord. So our standards that we want to apply are obviously very important. But are there alternatives that would be a suitable alternative, or is that not being considered at this point? Thank you.
Sandy.
Thank you, Chair. I have to say before my time, I believe in terms of the strategic business case, there was some thought whether there would be any interest from institutional investors in this sort of product. And I think that was established that wasn't the case. This wouldn't be an attractive proposition. So no, we haven't investigated whether there are any, how can I put it, private companies that would be prepared to acquire these properties, as is the case at the moment. I think what we're recommending to you today is a model that protects the HRA, it provides control for the council and delivers the market rented products that the council saw from the outset. So yeah, I'm sure, I don't think we've investigated any other options in terms of any other way in which this could be provided in the private sector.
I can add to that going down this path does preclude us from doing anything in an alternative way in the future if we see the benefits to us and our residents in taking an alternative approach. So things can run in parallel. That's my point. Thank you. Okay, moving on. I have to skip past the exempt appendices, which we will return to in closed session. So Appendix D and Appendix E, I think both together. Any questions on those? Okay, so been through the report. We've asked the questions. Just open it up now to debate. Any debate? Councillor Hurrell.
Chair, thank you. We all, I think, understand the requirement for more affordable homes in our district. And obviously, this model helps us to bring a different tenure to bear, which I think has been part of our overall strategy, and I'm sure will be assessed again as we look at the housing strategy later in the year. So the objective for this in terms of its delivery, I think, has been a long-standing desire for the council. I think as we move forward, it's great that we have the properties available and ready to occupy. We certainly don't want to delay that given the demand that we have in the district. I think what we've heard this morning is that we'll need to keep a careful eye on how this develops and the finances and how it's managed to make sure that it actually, the reality is as we currently predict. And I would encourage this committee to be reviewing that on a regular basis, as indeed, Chair, you've already indicated you intend, so that we can all be reassured that we're on the right path here. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Hurrell. Councillor Cutler.
Sorry, Chair. Just to add to that, I mean, Councillor Hurrell talks about providing affordable housing. In fact, in this case, we're providing an area that the market is not currently supplying well, but at market rents, which is slightly different than affordable housing. And if the market is not providing it, then I think perhaps some of our discussions may say that actually, if you look at it long term, we're investing some money into this that is not providing any sort of return, and that's why the market won't deal with it. The only way we can provide it effectively as a council is effectively in a business case that works but does not provide the profit that the private sector would want out of that process. So what we're doing is intervening in the market here rather than to provide market accommodation and quality that we have identified as being lacking in the city. So in that respect, I think we have a sensible vehicle for effectively intervening in that market and providing something that the broader market doesn't provide. And having been through all the detail of it, I recognise that in strictly economic terms or business-like terms, there is no money made out of it, but the risks are fairly low, and so we have provided a sensible vehicle in order to provide what we see is needed in the city. That would be my support for this proposal.
Thank you, Scott. Can I ask if Mr. Light would like to contribute from a tax perspective on this?
Yes, in theory, we agree with the company. I'd also like to say about Mr. Tate's concerns about the 16 houses that we did agree that they should be used for housing Ukraine refugees, and also, but that we would like to see them put out when possible to local people looking for housing. So in that respect, I'd like to see them go back into that eventually when there is a drop in need, perhaps, of housing the refugees. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Light, and I appreciate your support for the paper and the proposal here. And just to reassure you, the HMOs that we have purchased, we don't have the Ukrainian families to move in. So at this point, they will be made available to the wider list. So they will be available for use immediately. We will react when we need to. We have Ukrainian families who are homeless and need to be housed at the right time. So it's actually delivering what you've just asked for.
Thanks a lot for that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Batho.
Thank you. I'd just like to sort of support the proposal in that obviously our requirement for all policy in terms of homes for all is supported by this, but obviously as well the response to resident need and the requirement for a different type of tenancy is obviously being presented here, and that then reflects in terms of our requirement, or again a policy in terms of listening to our residents and listening better. So I think it actually covers a number of aspects of our, sort of policy, and I think is therefore to be recommended. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Batho. Any further debate? In which case, I will have my position as well, in that I fully support the paper going forwards. If I look back at the purpose of the this particular establishing a local housing company, providing homes for all is a key priority within the council plan, and this it's for supporting households who struggle to access affordable long-term market housing. I meet many people when I go around and knock on the doors, younger people, and they've spoken to me as we were running up to the election, saying, "What are you doing about helping me provide, live in the city and find accommodation?" Because they find it so expensive, and anything that we can do to help keep our younger people in the city and provide them with homes that they can afford, I absolutely fully support. And I believe that the intention of this is to provide good quality homes, as Mr. Palmer has outlined, that are available for rent through a reputable provider. And I think it's a valuable position going forwards. I take on board Councillor Horrell's point that there are alternatives as well, but I do honestly believe that, this is a way of doing it, and doing this does not preclude us from going down other avenues as were outlined by Mr. Tate and Councillor Horrell. And I also think it serves the community. So there was a specific request from the residents on the Windle Estate to ensure greater diversity of accommodation on that estate, and this proposal that is before you today actually supports the wishes and desires of the residents on the Windle Estate by us acquiring these 41 units for the housing company, renting through the housing company. So I think it's to be applauded in that respect as well, that we're actually really meeting local wishes and requirements, and we're servicing the requirements of the broader city and district for homes from a reputable supplier at an affordable price. So moving on, Councillor Miller, you wanted to discuss the exempt items in detail. So what I would propose at this point is that we move the motion, unless you want to change your mind on that. You don't? Okay. So at this point, we'll go back to the agenda. I would like to move the motion that we move into exempt session in order to consider the information contained in the exempt appendices to CAB 3406R before returning to an open session to consider the report's recommendations. Live video streaming to YouTube will be stopped whilst we're in exempt session, but will restart when we return to the open session of the meeting. Members of the public and press are asked to leave the meeting room. Once we've finished discussing the exempt appendices, we will come back into open session and you will be invited to rejoin us if you wish to do so at that point. Once back in the open session, we'll move to any further debate and consideration of the report recommendations. Is that agreed? Thank you. We're moving to the officers to make that happen. Be grateful. Thank you. Okay, so thank you. Return back into open session, the Cabinet Housing Committee meeting. Having just discussed in exempt session, the exempt appendices, is there any further debate on the overall paper, both the open section and the exempt section discussions? Any further debate at this point? Okay, thank you. So I think we're at the point where we will just summarise and move to the recommendations. And to be clear, the voting members on this committee are the cabinet members. So I think we've had a full frank discussion and debate through the paper. We stepped through it item by item, answered questions. And I think everybody's had a fair hearing and in being able to put the views forward. I think the feeling I get overall is that there is no dissent at all around this table in terms of supporting this proposal for a housing company to move forwards and to move forwards through our recommendations to council. So the recommendations before us are to the Cabinet Committee Housing are firstly to approve the draft financial business plan at Appendix B in the exempt part of the agenda and refer to full council for consideration. Point 2, subject to approval of the financial business plan by full council to authorise the strategic director with housing responsibility to firstly finalise the lease of one block of 41 one-bedroom flats at Winnell from the council to Venter Living Limited. Second part, to approve the general fund capital expenditure of £150,000 for the equity investment in Venter Living by the council, which is a sufficient level of funding for working capital purposes. Recommendation number 3, to authorise the soft marketing of the units at Winnell by Venter Living, so tenancies commence with the minimum of delay following completion, subject to full council agreeing the reserve matters. 4, to refer approval of appointment of Fiander Tuvell Limited as external auditors to full council. Are we agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. Just to complete that section, this will now go to full council and to full council to agree the financial business plan as recommended by the Cabinet Housing Committee. And secondly, to approve the appointment of Fiander Tuvell Limited as external auditors to Venter Living Limited as recommended by the Cabinet Housing Committee. So with that, I thank you all for your participation and close the meeting. Thank you. I don't. I apologise. I've got one item to go. I unclosed the meeting. I have one further item that we skipped past in the exempt session, and I will come to that. Councillor Horry, you had your hand up. Was to stop me making a mistake, or?
No, Chair, it was relating to item 9,
yes,
actually, that I wanted to ask a question, if I may.
Please do.
Chair, there were a number of items that we had on the Cabinet Housing agenda with your predecessor.
Yep.
And I wondered how we work with you to ensure that some of those items are come to this committee. So, for example, I know the officers were doing a full review of the customer service offer, which had created much concern amongst residents, TACT in particular, who are not here, but they had made representation to us. So I'm just wanting to understand how we might raise with you formally how we ensure that some of those items come on the work plans that we're going forward for future meetings through the latter part of this year and into early next. Thank you.
Okay, I think for items going onto the agenda, then I've yet to have a full conversation with Mr. Henty and Mrs. Knight about the items that should go on. I'm something like 6 weeks into this role. And I do know that we need a full review of our housing strategy, and we need to review the impact of that strategy on the HRA. So as a very minimum, I would see those items as major items over the next few months. you and I do have and will have regular meetings, and where I'm very happy for that subject to be discussed. At that point, I'll also make the offer to the leader of the Green Party as well to ensure that their input is brought in, and that will be taken back into our discussions as to the correct papers that should be brought through this committee, through Cabinet and through Business, Housing and Policy Committee as well. So I think there's a big role for those to play as well, which Councillor Bathurst chairs, and we're in regular dialogue as well. So hopefully that answers your question there. So the dates of the next meetings are scheduled for the 14th of November. And I believe housing strategy is penciled in for that particular meeting, and the 5th of February 2024. So I'll try again. We're at that point. I consider business to be done, and I close the meeting. Thank you.